You haven't heard the next part, where I come back to the U.S. and Al Seeley puts me together with a New York City detective who's a customs agent. And he has an informer who was, like John Davidson, he was a smuggler, heroin smuggler, GI from Vietnam. And he flips, and he tells a story about smuggling heroin in the bodies of the KIAs. And I'm one of the guys, because Seeley had me debriefing him. And debriefing him, I find out the source for the heroin being smuggled in the bodies of our soldiers was the same people who had just been protected. Now, why? Because here's the answer, and it's the answer that why heroin is being protected from Afghanistan right now. Same answer. Vietnam, our Congress had said, we're not supporting that war anymore. So, CIA took it on themselves to ensure that the anti-North Korean factions, who were supported by us, were now supported by heroin trafficking. There was a lot. They call it the junkie tax. That's the story of Air America. That was the motivation. Political choice. Now, the same thing would happen to me 3 times in my career. The choice is made that the junkie tax takes precedent. The junkie tax helps covert agencies, it's not just CIA, work around Congress.
Gotta get it. Y'all don't understand the condition that he living. He on a mission. You can't knock the ambition. All he ever wanted was his daddy's attention. But dad didn't listen, so the streets still.
My next guest on the TeeCast has really impacted my career in a number of ways. I've followed him for years. He's a retired DEA agent, worked undercover at the absolute highest levels in and out of the United States, written 2 best-selling books. Perhaps you've seen him talk about his stories on Dateline or 60 Minutes or Inside Edition or Good Morning America. Here we really want to learn the man, not the legend. The stories that he has are extraordinary. The perspectives he has are extraordinary, and we can learn so much from him. But what does it take to become the type of person who's willing to take the extraordinary risks that he did to make this place better? So without further ado, please join me in welcoming my good friend, Mr. Michael Levine. I find you to be a fascinating cat for sure, and somebody that I've admired before my undercover career began myself. I, read up as many experiences that other people had, and you were obviously, one of the top guns, and it certainly carried your career on. So I have endless questions for you, but I want to get some things that were a little bit more introspective for you as a person, starting with where'd you grow up? I know you started your career in New York and everything. Is that where you were born and raised?
Yeah, the South Bronx. I actually grew up in a pretty bad neighborhood, inner city. When I was a kid, it was all working class people, Italians, Irish, Jews. And then overnight, about my 9th year, I was about 9 years old when Puerto Ricans started to flood into my neighborhood. And they called it the white flight. All the people who had money ran. And my father had already deserted my mother. We were very poor. And I'm thankful for it because my upbringing was pretty rough, but I loved it. It just really helped make me whatever it is I am. I'm not, to this day, I'm still not sure exactly what I am. But it helped make me, I'll tell you what, because of my upbringing, I was able to survive, and I underline survive, undercover work as it used to be. That all changed very much. But as a kid, my baby brother became a heroin addict on the street, and eventually would commit suicide. We're leaving a note, my family and friends. I just can't take the drugs anymore. He was a heroin addict for 19 years, and we had all kinds of. We had our family was heavily affected by drugs, so that let's see, what's most important for you guys to know about me. I learned Spanish on the street. I was, kind of afraid. I'm very dark skinned. So as a kid, the best street gangs around me were Puerto Ricans. So I started hanging with them and picking up what you call Spanglish, and picked it up so well that when DEA sent me to Argentina, they tested me in at the Language Institute down in Washington, and they said, "Do you speak a street 3, whatever the hell that is?"
Which is important for your career. It's less important if you need to take a test in school, but for your career and all intents and purposes, that's exactly what you needed to know, right?
Oh yeah. Early on, so I joined the military and I became an air policeman. And mind you, thinking I was a bad kid. I had been arrested twice as a juvenile before I went into the military, and they made me a police. That was my first experience with police. Why? Because at that particular time, this was 1958. I'm joining the U.S. Air Force. I thought at least I'd learn a trade because I was going to get drafted. Otherwise, everybody was getting drafted. And so I joined the Air Force, and whether I wanted to or not, they sent me to Air Police School. And there began, I loved it. I became a cop and loved it. From that I became a sentry dog handler. I was canine in the military. I was the division in the Air Force that was combat trained, called the Combat Defense Force and / Air Police. So I went through that whole academy and just fell in love with it. It gave me a direction in life. Get out of the Air Force. First job out of the Air Force is a dog trainer. So I'm working at, that's what I knew how to do. I go back to college, get a degree in accounting, and hated accounting. Don't know why. To this day, I'm not sure why I majored in accounting, but I'm graduating Hofstra University, and I have a degree in accounting. And there's nothing that an accountant does that I would want to spend minutes of my life doing. No less the rest of my life. And I listened to an all-night radio show, one of these talk shows. And the commentator's talking about James Bond. He said, in our government, he said, there's only one federal agency that actually does that James Bond kind of work, travel from country to country, different identifications, etc. And that sounded so intriguing to me. Mind you, I'm sitting on a bench at Hofstra University listening to this. And what is that job? Federal narcotic agents. I didn't even know the job existed until I heard it that day on the bench.
Very cool. And you knew you'd fit right in. I mean, you'd kind of already lived a life similar to that, and you were around people that had been involved with drugs already. So it seemed like that had to be an epiphany for you.
This is pretty funny, actually. So to get a degree in accounting, I speak street Spanish. A guy comes up to me at Hofstra University. He says, "You're looking like your head's up your a-hole." What's wrong? Because I'm graduating. At that point, I had a son, a baby. I was married. And all I knew was, broke. All I knew was that I did not want to spend my life doing what I had been studying. The other thing that happened that I'm going too fast is, in the military, I was a heavyweight boxer at Plattsburgh Air Force Base. And thought that, I couldn't die. I got involved with the martial arts, heavyweight. I was really a scared kid, but a big, strong, scared kid, and became a decent boxer. What was really funny was I was the only white guy on the boxing team, and the black coach wanted me to turn pro, and I wasn't that good. And I told him, he said, "Man, Levine," he said, you be the white hope. That's what they were looking for in those years. I said, "White hope, coach, come on." He said, "Yeah, but you make a lot of money." He said, "We'll take you." He wanted to be my manager. He was retiring from the military. He wanted to be my manager. And I told him, Coach Matthews, I said, if that ever happens, this will be the first time in history You had a Jewish fighter with a black manager. Just doesn't happen, Coach.
I love it.
So here I am. Crazy kid that I was. You know, as an 18, 19-year-old, you don't think you're going to die. Well, the following happens to me. The guy's name was Haywood, and Haywood and I we're gonna march in a parade on May Day, and Haywood doesn't have a hat. So I tell you what, I'll sell you my hat. I have an extra one for $3. And he's okay, done. So I sell him the hat for $3, and then kind of forget about it. And a couple of weeks goes by, and I see him in the barracks, and we get into an argument. I want my $3 because $3 in those years was enough to pretty much get drunk for the whole weekend, you know. And he said, that's the way I lived. Deacon, that's the way I was living then. So he and I argue, and he says, okay, let's meet in the back of the barracks. Fine. You know, like I said, I was a heavyweight boxer. He was much smaller than me. But he wanted to meet me in the back of the barracks. The other thing you have to know is that the racial thing was very big in Plattsburgh Air Force Base. So he's a black guy. A lot of people unsure of what I was because being the only white guy in the black boxing team, when I went on TV, local TV, people came away, you know, just not sure. They said that could be anything, which also fed into the rest of my life. I'm trying to go through this real fast, but it's very important.
No, yeah, I'm loving it.
Haywood and I, we get into this very public argument. It's all over the base. We're supposed to meet. He doesn't show up. It's around midnight behind the barracks. There must have been 200-300 people there ready to see this fight.
Oh, wow. Everyone heard about it. Okay.
Oh, yeah. This, by the way, is it's referenced in 2 books, this incident. One was a book written about me by a fellow named Donald Goddard while I was still a DEA agent. I had gotten a lot of publicity for different cases, and Random House hired Donald Goddard to contact me, and DEA gave him permission, and he wrote this book that everybody hates, called Undercover by Donald Goddard. And so this is in that book. If you can get it, you can still get it, I think. And so Haywood doesn't show up, and I did the dumbest thing in the world. I start calling him all kinds of stuff, and it gets all around. And now we cut to myself, my roommate Richie O'Hara, 2 girls from Plattsburgh State Teachers College, and we're trying to impress them. We were both Century dog handlers, the 2 of us. We're driving them across the ramp to the kennels, the canine kennels. On the way back, who's at the gate? Haywood. Again, long story short, he calls me out of the car. I get out of the car. He smacks me in the face, pulls a gun, pulls the trigger, aims it at my stomach. It's a 45 caliber gun. Doesn't fire. Misfires.
Good Lord.
Yes, good Lord. And that's what happened. It was kind of like winning life's lotto in reverse. Because I came away. Oh, it gets crazy. Years later, now we cut to 1973, 74, and I'm in the bullpen, Southern District Court in New York City, and in those years, DEA had all the prisoners. I mean, you know, the FBI didn't do drugs yet. If you went to the federal lockup, all you saw were DEA prisoners. So I'm down there, as was usual, just about daily, with 2-3 prisoners. And I hear a voice yell, "There is the luckiest MF that ever lived." And I look across the bullpen, and there's my air police sergeant. He's now a deputy marshal. And he starts speaking in a loud voice. He said, "You know what happened to this guy?" And he's walking across as he's talking to me. He said, and then he reaches me. He tells him about the gun. The gun didn't fire, but he was an air police sergeant. I never knew what he's about to tell me. That Haywood tried to kill me and was surprised when the gun didn't fire. The air police got the gun, because we had witnesses. They test fired it, and it fired every time. They had the shell where it struck the center of the bullet, but it didn't go off, and nobody could understand why. At that point, it all became real to me. At the time, Lieutenant Kelly, who was the lieutenant in the Air Police Squadron, brought me in. All he knew was had been arrested. There were 3 witnesses, and he said, "Levine, you'll recognize the tenor of these kinds of words. This is Air Police. We resolve it in our own squadron. Now you could go along with this or not." He said, "If you don't push charges against Haywood, he'll be on a plane to Greenland for the next year, tomorrow or the next day." And I was a 19-year-old kid. The lieutenant was telling me not to press charges, don't push it. So I did. I went along with it. And, as you become a DEA agent, you run into a lot of situations like that. You go along with it. And you make a choice whether you're going to have the whole agency after you, as I had most of my career, or you don't. So, it is the philosophical end of this, and what affected me most throughout the rest of my life, and that is, I understood the truth of the old Arab expression, any day is a good day, any moment is a good moment to die. And I started valuing being alive, experiment. I didn't want to die, and I knew your life is so flimsy. Yours is, you and I both. You just don't know. But I wanted to take advantage of every moment. I wanted to experiment. I wanted to go do and try everything I could. What better opportunity than to become some international undercover agent?
Yeah.
Get through it.
Well, and look, as serendipitous as all that is, it seems a lot of other people might be more conservative after something like that, though, too, because you stated as though, hey, I experienced life in a different way and moved forward from that point and valued every single day. So I decided to put everything at risk, my family. You already had a wife and a child and everything else, and you decided to just say, I'm going to put all of it out there on a daily basis. That's a pretty admirable direction to go under those circumstances.
I don't know if it's admirable, but I think you were infected by it. You get a tremendous high that's addictive. You get, it's like they asked Sir Edmund Hillary why he climbed Mount Everest, and he said because it's fair. Well, that was undercover work. So I go to work, and in those years, you really have to go into why you had agents who were undercovers. That's all we did. 3-4 buys a day, 5, 6, 7, 8 buys a week. That's what you did. Why was that so? In those years, informers were called traitors. They were scumbags. They were called dirtbags. They were rats. In New York, we call them stool pigeons. Prosecutors in New York, I don't know about the rest of the country, the prosecutors in New York did not want to use an informer on a witness stand. They eschewed doing that because they had big problems with the background and the credibility and the personal character of the guy. So that the prosecutors would come in with a case, and I spent most of my career in DEA was as a street supervisor, group supervisor. So it was not only me. I had 15, 20 different people, including New York detectives, working for me. And let's talk about the first 10 years of DEA in New York City. Because my understanding is it was quite different anywhere else. But in New York City, they would come in and say, I don't know if you ever heard this expression, you got to duke an agent in. That means you had an ongoing case, and they needed to get somebody inside, but they didn't want an informant inside. So you had to get agents who you could duke in, that is, get introduced into the organization, whatever ethnicity, whatever the reputation. You had to get a guy, one of us, who had taken an oath to defend the Constitution, to obey the law, not a betrayer. We were The undercover agent was a seducer. The informant was a betrayer. And that continues to this day.
Yeah, I think it's very similar. I mean, and you see the catastrophes that become of the cases that are hinged strictly upon an informant. I mean, I noticed that you speak out a lot on this, and you've worked cases, post retirement, dealing with this kind of stuff too. And I've seen a lot of informant mishandling, but that still remains that you're dealing with somebody at the very least. If they're not being a stool pigeon, they still have a sketchy past. I mean, there's only a certain type of person that can actually introduce you into the criminal element, and that's somebody who's already involved with them enough to introduce you in the first place. So you always have to combat that.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting, though, that prosecutors get up in front of a jury? This has changed drastically over the last couple of decades, and they would say, in training you were told never trust an informant. At the same time, nowadays the prosecutor gets up and says, "Oh, trust this man. He's turned over a new leaf. He's now a believer in the second coming. He's now totally he's now religious. His family, they'll do anything to win the case." And the fact is, we know, we're sitting there in court listening to this, and we know that the guy is lower than worm doo-doo. I wouldn't.
Well, so what do you think of this? This is not necessarily on my itinerary here, but it makes me think. What about and during your era, even it existed even more so, but it still exists today, where you have a certain sect of cops, whether it be racially violent or somebody that just at any cost wants to make a case. And I see that more than anything. You see people at a detective level trying to make cases, and once they get their head set on something, they don't want to see the truth at all. And I almost see a lot of cops acting in that same role that the informants were in, where they can step in and say, well, I will testify to this, and make up all kinds of stuff. You see railroads left and right. And I know that it's hurting law enforcement in general, who needs all the help that they can get. Have you witnessed any of that or dealt with any of that in your
all the time? I'm a trial consultant. I'm an expert witness. So you're talking about a good percent. I handle mostly two kinds of cases, and right now I've got a calendar full of them. I handle use of deadly force cases. In fact, over the last 12 years, I've been working for 2 district attorneys' offices, reviewing police-involved shootings. And, it's sad to say, about 2.5 years ago, I ended up doing this consulting work, testifying before a grand jury and indicting a police officer in Georgia. And he was convicted of homicide. He was just recently sentenced to 28 years in prison. And that's a case I fielded as a civilian use of force consultant. In some ways, I've never retired, Tegan. I've been doing a lot of the same work I did in OPR, internal affairs, as a supervisor. I'm still doing it. The only difference is I don't carry a gun. So I get up in court and I'm testifying now all the time, and they say, "Well, when did you retire?" I said, "Well, the fact is, I never really retired. I'm still doing it."
Does it make you feel older? The longer ago that becomes, I'm sure it becomes harder to utter it.
Oh, yeah. They stop saying it because, what happens is I'm in front of a jury and I start to talk about it, and I start to talk about cases. What I'm doing, I'm working for 2 district attorneys' offices, but I actually go out with the district attorneys and investigators and do crime scenes. But here I'm retired from DEA since 1990. So but I can't say, and I'll testify to this in front of the jury. How can I say I'm retired? I'm just not. There's no difference in what I'm doing, except I don't go out there with a gun. Although I have, as you do, I have the authority to carry a gun anywhere in this country, but that's not part of my job. So if you want to know, when you ask me the question, when did I retire? No, what you want to say is, when did some police agency stop paying me for going out on the street arresting people?
Yeah.
Because that's it.
And then you started your own. You started your own. I mean, you have your own agency now, so technically you're not retired, right?
Nah, I'm a one-man operation. I did a one-man operation for 30 years. I'm a licensed private investigator, but that's just what you have to do this business. What I find more than anything is how bad attorneys are. Oh my God, defense attorneys. They'll go to trial even though they don't have the slightest idea how to defend
That's amazing.
on an informant-driven case. They will go to trial and they will not hire an expert. How many times I catch myself saying, look, don't hire me, but if you go to trial without an expert, you're gone already. Your client's gone. And you know what? They don't hire the expert because, unfortunately, for a lot of people who get in trouble and who really shouldn't be in trouble, like informant entrapment cases where informants create the crime. There's no crime until they create it. It's not, you're not intercepting a crime. You're not stopping a crime. They're creating it. So, I mean, that's all the way back when I went to U.S. Treasury Law Enforcement School. That's exactly the instruction. Entrapment is if the crime would not happen without the intervention of the undercover, whether it be an informant or agent, then you got to start thinking entrapment. If it happened only after you got into it, but that has changed drastically over the years. I'm going to start crying. Some of these cases are terrible. Some of these cases are so terrible. But thank you, God. Thank you so much, God. I'm still doing it. I'm still got my health, and I got the greatest wife in the world. I've been sick in love with this woman since I met her 35 years ago, and that's my strength in this world.
And I tell you, I completely relate to that. And it was one of my questions. How was she during, I mean, we haven't even gotten scratched the surface on the insane things you did as an undercover, but assuming that we will educate the audience about the insane things that you did accomplish, how did she I know you're out of touch at certain points. You're not actually able to call home all the time and keep in touch. She has to be a superhero of support, but she's also got to be somebody that you lean on and get feedback from. Did you ever include her in some of your thought processes just to bounce ideas from somebody that maybe doesn't have an internal view of things, just to keep your head straight? Or how did that relationship work during those times?
Well, this is my second marriage, Tegan. And my first marriage, we got married when I was 22 and she was 18, and we had a son right away. That was my son, who became a New York City policeman and was killed in the line of duty. That was him. And when you get married very young, I was going to school to be an accountant when we got married.
So she was fine with that, I assume.
She was fine with that. Then I got this first job, because I had a degree in accounting. I got a job with Internal Revenue Intelligence Division. Internal Revenue Intelligence Division, they had an organized crime division. And in those years, there was the wagering tax stamp. So they needed somebody who could speak enough Spanish to go out undercover and make bets in what they call bolita. Bolita is a Spanish numbers game that was prevalent in the early 60s throughout New York. And I was taken from the income tax unit and put into the organized crime unit and given a new car, a little hat to wear, and I was going out on the street making bolita bets. So what happened is I'm on the street making bolita bets, and people are offering me dope. So I'm immediately working drugs and gambling. And around that time, I found out that my brother's a really bad heroin addict. And I want to get into narcotic enforcement. In those years, there were only 250 federal narcotic agents in the world that couldn't get the job. So instead, I got a job with Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. And we enforced a crime called federal crime committed while carrying a firearm. So I would go out on the street and buy a bag of dope and a gun from the same guy. And I did an enormous amount of those cases. And so much so that the prosecutor was complaining about me. They don't like these cases. They don't want these small nickel and dime gun cases with heroin or whatever it was. They were looking for political crimes, etc. And so from their complaints about me, I made an enormous amount of these cases, by the way. And from that, I volunteer. I applied to the hard narcotics smuggling unit of U.S. Customs because I wanted to get in narcotic enforcement. President Nixon had said that is the true danger to the American public and our children in black. And I believe this was sincere. None of it was, it's all bullshit, but I believed it. I get hired on the basis that I could speak Spanish. And I'm put into the hard narcotic smuggling group. I don't know how I got into this or what else. Anyway, this was my first experience during the Vietnam War. I arrested a guy in New York, John Edward Davidson. This case is also in the book Undercover by Donald Goddard. He arrested him at JFK Airport. He flips, takes me to the financier that night. We do a controlled delivery of 3 kilos of heroin. We bust the financier actually in a swamp in Florida. John Edward Davidson flips. He agrees to put me in contact with the source of heroin in Bangkok. Next thing I know, I'm undercover in Bangkok, Thailand, unable to tell anybody, traveling on a tourist visa because there was a war going on. There was a war going on between not only the U.S. and the North Vietnamese, but between the Federal Bureau of Narcotics and Customs over turf. Which war was worse? I have no idea.
Yeah.
So
counterproductive.
Yeah. So then suddenly I find myself really in danger, in more danger than I like to think about now. I don't think we have enough time to go into this whole story. It should be a book, and maybe if I live long enough, it will be. It's mentioned in the book Undercover by Donald Goddard, but it was my first run-in with Central Intelligence, who ended up protecting the source of heroin that I was working with. And that was my first run-in. I mean, I was brought into the American Embassy at night while the case was coming apart. I was getting no funding, and the Chinese and Thai drug dealers loved me. They thought I was the tutti frutti of the mafia from the U.S. They invited me to Chiang Mai to what they called a factory where they're producing hundreds of kilos of heroin. And the reason they were inviting me to go up to northern Thailand is because they wanted to sell me a lot. You know, they had been selling 2-3 kilos at a time to John Edward Davidson, the informant who flipped, but they wanted to do 50 kilos at a time. We could work it out, getting it into the U.S. And nobody believed. We didn't even know that there were this magnitude of heroin producing was going on. And that's when I'm brought into the American Embassy, 3:00 in the morning. Wonderful Joe Jenkins. He was the customs guy in charge. One arm. You can't make this crap up. And I'm introduced to my first Central Intelligence agent, and he says the following: "You're not going to Chiang Mai. We want you to end the case here in Bangkok. I already identified the guy making false bottom suitcases. I had the financier. I arrested him in Florida. I had the smuggler, and we don't want you to go any further." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because we can't protect you up there." I said, "Nobody's protecting me, and I didn't do this. I thought I was ready to die on my sword. My brother was a heroin addict. I thought, this is it. I'm going for the very heart of heroin producing in the Golden Triangle area. The people who were putting heroin into the veins and brains of our soldiers in Vietnam. The people, and you're stopping me? That's how messed up I was. I was pretty much suicidal, I guess. And he says the following. He said, "You're military, Levine. We have your records." He said, "You are, as military, you understand that you don't know the whole picture. You don't know the big picture. We're asking you to do this." And I agreed, that I didn't. I didn't really think that much of myself or what I was doing. And so I went along with it. We arrested the two guys I was dealing with. They delivered a kilo of heroin to me, to my hotel. 2 or 3 days later, they're busted. We get the false bottom suitcase guy. It's written up as this major international case. First undercover guy busts the smuggler, busts the financier, busts the source of heroin around the world. So I get a $250 U.S. Treasury award. At the same time, I'm under investigation for I don't even remember what, which stops. They put me in for the Attorney General's award. 4 times I was put in for that, and all 4 times I didn't get it because I was under investigation.
No.
Figure that out.
Yeah,
that's the life of an
You work too hard. You just work too hard.
I'm listening to myself. I sound like I'm rambling, so you better straighten me out, right, Deacon?
Well, look. So let me interject here. So this I've never heard the Bangkok story. Do you think those guys legitimately were deconflicting, or do you think this was conspiratorial, or do you even know at this point what the motivation was, since you were so green at the time?
Oh yeah, the motivation. But you haven't heard the next part. Where I come back to the U.S. and Al Seeley puts me together with a New York City detective who's a customs agent, and he has an informer who was like John Davidson. He was a smuggler, heroin smuggler, GI from Vietnam, and he flips and he tells a story about smuggling heroin in the bodies of the KIAs. And I'm one of the guys, because Seeley had me debriefing him, and debriefing him, I find out the source for the heroin being smuggled in the bodies of our soldiers was the same people who had just been protected. Now, why? Because here's the answer, and it's the answer that why heroin is being protected from Afghanistan right now. Same answer. Vietnam, our Congress had said, we're not supporting that war anymore. So, CIA took it on themselves to ensure that the anti-North Korean factions, who were supported by us, were now supported by heroin trafficking. There was a lot. They call it the junkie tax. That's the story of Air America. That was the motivation, political choice. Now the same thing would happen to me 3 times in my career. The choice is made that the junkie tax takes precedent. The junkie tax helps covert agencies, it's not just CIA, work around Congress. Support, you had the Contras. Contras were smuggling drugs hand over fist, but yet they weren't worked on. They were never investigated. They weren't prosecuted. You couldn't work the case into the Contras because the Contras were our people.
Right. Yeah. And I remember that was the story that Gary Webb had broke, and still ends up being somewhat of a controversy today, since, I know they've changed some of the guidelines to crack cocaine and stuff too, but how it impacted the poor neighborhoods and everything else. And then to find out that there was, government inner workings at whatever level you want to believe it occurred, where essentially to fund that war, we're allowing dope to come in and challenge those poor neighborhoods, right?
Well, both my books had the same thing. I spelled it out. Deep Cover and The Big White Lie. I spelled out exactly what happened. Deep Cover was a New York Times bestseller, and I spell it out. Not only that, but the betrayal of Kiki Camarena by people in DEA, and I named them. And it's spelled out. So what else do you do as a person, as a human being, is somebody who wants to tell you, all you guys who's ever listening to this, this is the reality. I'll tell you the reality, but not only will I tell it to you, I'll prove it to you. I have the evidence. So what happens when you do, you understand when you know what it is to write a book. You have to go through a libel reading with attorneys. That's more thorough than any prosecutor will ever put you through, checking your evidence. So, in fact, I've got movie interest right now. And it's interesting. I mean, I've had movie interest multiple times over the years. Why the movies never get made, I don't know. At this point in my life, I don't even care. But this movie interest, right? I've done all I could, Tegan. I'm talking on this show right now because it's cheaper than a psychiatrist. I'm getting stuff.
And I'm happy to answer any questions you have for me too. If you need a psychiatrist,
No.
super cheap. I can be really endearing in the right circumstance.
Yeah, I bet you can, man. Well, you're an undercover. You're an undercover. That's what you do. You seduce people out of their. You seduce people out of their lives.
Well, you're the one guy I think I couldn't undercover and undercover. So I think you know better.
Nah, I'm easy. I'm easier than you think. I'm easier than I think.
So okay, so I had a couple questions. Do people pawn off a lot of these stories because look, I'll just admit, I'm one of the people that is hard to convince when you're and I'm not saying you specifically, but when people come out and they're conspiracy theorists, I'm hard to convince because I think the further along in time we get, the harder it is to get people to just shut their mouths and there's so many checks and balances and ways to communicate these days. It seems harder and harder and harder. Is that kind of a way that people have gotten around? Do you get accused of being a conspiracy theorist in ways? And is that how you get dismissed? Because otherwise it is what it is, right?
It kind of exactly. But here's what happens when I've had top people in media say, well, he's a conspiracy theorist. And I always come back with, hold on. I'm a trained conspiracy professional. Conspiracy is a crime. You understand how easy in my career, I had to put more than 1,000 people behind bars for hundreds of years for conspiracy. So what are you talking about, conspiracy theorist? I do this professionally. And it's easy to prove a conspiracy. In both my books, The Big White Lie and in Deep Cover, I give you all the elements of probable cause you need to go to a grand jury, to go to trial. And I name the people. I've done no different during all the years I was a DEA agent. I took the same amount of facts that I'm giving you in these books and indicted people for conspiracy. And now RICO makes it even easier. So, okay, yeah, I'm a conspiracy theorist, but I want to tell you where I got my training. From the United States Department of Justice. They taught me to be a conspiracy theorist. Anyway, that's about as far as I can go, though. Most people don't even understand that, Tegan. You say conspiracy theorist. Tell me what you mean. First, let me ask you a question. Do you know anything about the law of conspiracy? Do you? Not people who call you conspiracy theorists, in most cases, don't even know what the law of conspiracy is. And that's a fact.
Yeah. And when you're talking about numbers, I think people associate it with extremism because, again, they say, well, the government has done this, and done this, and done this, and they have checks and balances in place. But if you have a handful of rogues that can go off, or even less than a handful, as you would know, you got 3 little rogues that go off and do something that could impact the United States in a significant way, and they manage to keep their mouths shut, then it's accomplishable. I think it's a lot of the other things that they associate with somebody saying that somehow 9/11 was created by the government and things like that, where it would involve so many people and be so outrageous that they associate things that are actually that have tangible evidence attached to them, like what you're talking about, and put it into that category flippantly.
See, that's not a conspiracy theorist. That's a conspiracy nut. That's people who walk around with tinfoil antennas for hats. I mean, that's totally bizarre. To come up with some of those theories, it just makes no sense. True conspiracy is you take an element. If 2 people, you can show, you have proof that 2 people met with the purpose of creating a crime, and either one of them took any action to make that happen. In fact, on the drug law, you don't even need an action. You just need to prove the agreement. And you've got a conspiracy. You go to jail. So when you take that in context, you'll see that in my books, these are indictments for conspiracy. The books are. So they say conspiracy theorists, and I get tired of, answering that kind of thing. But then again, they did a study on the American intellectual, and they said 70% of this country is incapable of analytical thinking. And okay, that's 70%.
Yeah, we'll just look at the political ads.
Oh, you got it. Here's your explanation for everything you see. 70% of the American people, it's so easy for them to pick up the phrase, conspiracy theorists, and, you believe in UFOs too? And, I want to say, well, what religion are you? You believe in it? UFOs, they're on video. You don't believe it?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's amazing. So, today, so you've seen a lot of the angst and separation of a lot of the American communities and law enforcement. We've talked about seeing and your firsthand experience with crooked law enforcement or rogue agents or things like that. In addition to the fact that you are now getting to a point where law enforcement, well, hell, law enforcement will protect law enforcement, because that's basically what you've run into during a lot of your circumstances, where they just refuse to do what should be done for the sake of protecting one another. Even if somebody's a crook, I mean, you would think that eradicating the crooks would make law enforcement better. But what do you have any ideas about ways that we can improve the community and law enforcement relations, especially seeing the degradation of any progress that's been made? There's less talk and more extremism and defunding police and different things. Do you have any ideas or solutions in your mind that you'd be willing to chat about?
Well, I actually wrote a book called Fight Back. That's how the neighborhoods and communities and towns can win your own drug war. You don't have to wait for the police. And it was called by the Swedish Carnegie Institute the only anti-drug book that ever came out of America that made sense. And the first thing that happened was that the Partnership for a Drug-Free America came out against the plan, which was a plan to go after the market, not the source. Source is a waste of time. And the Partnership for a Drug-Free America came out against it, and I was able to, at the time I was the head of the drug bureau in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. I went to work for the sheriff's department. And I was able to intercept a partnership document which said if the Fight Back program is a success, it will take the wind out of the sails of the partnership. Well, what does that mean? They're a money making, or they're a bureaucracy that is self-evolving. People now retire from the Partnership for the Drug-Free America. You have cars, you have careers, you have pensions. So do you really want to make America drug-free? You want to end that? Anyway, that's what it came down to. And after that, if you want to be a glutton for self-punishment out there, listeners, just get Fight Back by Mike Levine.
I'll definitely. I plan to post up all of your books. That's I've certainly read the two King books, The Deep Cover and Big White Lie, of course, which were successful on different planes, right? I think any Undercover book, mine experienced the same thing, where you get lots of pushback and lots of celebration at the same time, depending on who's reading it. But everybody's interested because you have such a fascinating story, and your actions that you took in South America, and more extraordinary undercover work than most people will be able to claim. Is if for no other reason you're fascinated with that, are worth a read for sure. So I'm definitely gonna let people know about those books.
Yeah, it's all on one website, by the way. Michael Levine Books, oneword.com. MichaelLevineBook.com, and it's all there. With the exception of the book written about me, I didn't put it up on the website because I didn't like the book.
I was just say, you said nobody liked the book. Why would you do that?
No, I didn't. People liked the book, but DEA didn't like it. And they threatened, they had given the writer permission to to write the book. Actually, it started with an article in the New York Times that came out on June 17th, 1986. And the article was entitled "Acting on a Deadly Stage." They had come to DEA in New York looking for an agent that actually went into other countries with different passports and deep cover work. And I think in New York at the time, I was the only guy that did that. I think, I'm not sure, but so they volunteered me for that. New York Times writes that article. And that article evolved into Random House Books contacts a writer and they send them to DEA. DEA gives him permission. He writes this whole book. At the end of it, DEA hates it. They try to claim he didn't have any authorization, but, try to fight with Random House. At least, it's a little better, easier than more difficult to fight than one lonely out there on his own employee. So the bottom of the line is they would not let me promote the book, and I didn't like it anyway. So I didn't promote the book. And that's where we're at. I was actually kind of relieved that they wouldn't let me promote it because it depicted me as really some sort of a maniac, which I didn't think I was. Maybe other people would say differently, but I was a guy kicking filing cabinets, punching filing cabinets, punching doors, punching walls. That never happened. But the writer, a Brit, told me, well, we'd like to get a TV series and we're painting you as a character. He says, I took literary license. I say, yeah, but Donald, that's just not me.
Yeah, it's not even necessary. I mean, just take the stuff that you've done and it's nuts already. It's so unnecessary. It makes no sense when they do that.
For that reason, write your own book.
Yes, sir. Yeah, and I was grateful for your support on my book as well, but I will definitely recommend both of those and listen to the other books.
It was a great book, and you're one of the few real undercovers left that isn't an informant writing an undercover tone, saying I was an undercover. No, you're a dirtbag informant out there writing books saying you're an undercover. An undercover has to play by the rules. An undercover has to intercept crime, not create it. and that's the difference. It's very hard to do what you and I did because we can't break the rules. We take an oath to protect the Constitution, and to protect the Constitution, you have to live by it, my friends. Anyway, that's it.
I love it.
I'm off my soapbox. Yeah.
I've had Pablo Escobar's son on the cast, as well as William Rodriguez, who was with the Cali cartel. Have you had any briefings with those, any crossings with those guys? Because I know they're trying to kind of turn what was so horrific of a life experience into better things. Have you talked to those guys or have any experiences that you've been doing in order to kind of improve your life or improve anyone else's life? Anything going on with you?
Always, but it's not kind of stuff I can publicize. I'm involved. I get involved and deeply involved. And a lot of it comes from being a consultant, trial consultant, and people come to me and want to retain me and for this matter and that matter and have no money. And, if it's the right cause, I will, to this day, I'll still get buried in it.
Yeah. Well, and you sharing your stories is remarkable to me too. I mean, just the fact that you're here, first of all, I'm honored that you're here and I really appreciate your time, but sharing the experiences that you've had and sharing the parts of your life that makes you more endearing and understandable as a human being, and then to go into the extraordinary circumstances that you did. And I know we didn't really touch on going deep undercover and a lot of what you experienced during those things, but there's so much of it out there that I thought I really want to kind of humanize you because a lot of what you accomplished is so crazy unhuman. And that it gives people a better perspective about really how things are in the world, and hopefully will bring more of us together to have more of these conversations. And I definitely will reference and encourage listeners to go listen to, I mean, you can go all the way back to your 60 Minutes interviews or anything online that you can find, and you talk about the, the heroic deep dives that you do and the terrifying things that you found out, and you still talk to a lot of CIA agents, right, that are retired. And I know that's kind of the brunt of what you ran into was CIA based issues, right?
CIA agent, people get confused. A CIA agent is an informant, is a stool pigeon. CIA officer, they do nothing. People go to movies and they see Jack Ryan, etc. No CIA officer does that. I don't think that a CIA officer in history did what DEA agents do. They hire people to do their so-called undercover work, espionage. They consider themselves undercover when they go out and exchange messages with their spies, who they call agents. When you hear somebody say CIA agent, what they're really saying is they're CIs. DEA doesn't call them agents. We call them CI, CW, CF. CIA calls them agents.
But nonetheless still working at the behest of the CIA. So even the buffoonery that happens with a CIA agent who may be actually the stool pigeon is still the CIA responsibility, and just the same as CI working under law enforcement's instruction and doing some kind of jackassery would be accountable for that too, right? Yeah.
Of course, yeah. The book, The Big White Lie, I was assigned to work undercover posing as the lover of Sonia Atala. Sonia Atala was selling cocaine for the Bolivian government. One of her customers, mind you, she was a source for Pablo Escobar. Pablo Escobar named her the Queen of Cocaine. Now, what I found in the book, and I pretty much documented it in every way you can, Sonia was a CIA agent. And that's a fact.
Too much money out there. Too much money.
Yeah. You're right. I'm making myself busy.
Yeah. You watch a Dateline and see that somebody committed a murder for $6,000. Then imagining what 600 million would do to somebody is pretty easy at that point, right?
Oh yeah, life is a lot cheaper than people think.
Oh my gosh, yes. Well, I am so grateful to have had you on, and I apologize for some of the technical difficulties at the beginning, but so value your time, and it means a lot for me to be able to reach out to you. And if you ever need anything from me, I'm always here. Anything I can ever do for you, I'm here for you. And thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you, sir.
I appreciate you. Thank you, Tegan.
You have a great day. Holler anytime, all right?
Okay, my friend.
All right, see you.
The idea that the government knew the slave labor beast make a rich, hate a no favor, poor man doing what he gotta do. The dream to be king made it harder to see that his kingdom set him up for a coup. Well, it's the land of the free and home of the